Thanks everyone for joining us today on this Research and Review webinar, November edition. What we'd like to do first before we get started is to find out where everybody is joining us from. So if you can go ahead and use one of your indicators within Blackboard to let us know where you're joining us from, that would be great. Wonderful. It looks like we have representation from all over the country. So today we have a special webinar from the Idaho Digital Learning Academy as well as Northwest Nazarene University, and they'll be talking about blended learning, a look at their transformation of K-12 education in Idaho. We have 4 amazing speakers today, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce them and then hand them the microphone so that they can continue on with their presentation. First, we have Dr. Werth, who is the Director of E-Learning and Assistant Professor at Northwest Nazarene University in Nampa, Idaho. He teaches statistics and research methods, is a certified teacher, and is active in research related to the use of technology by K-12 teachers. We also have Dr. Sherawn Reberry, is the Director of Education Programs at Idaho Digital Learning Academy. Sherawn has experience as a building level principal and assistant superintendent for a district serving over 5,000 students. Additionally, she continues her duties as online principal for IDLA as she has the previous 8 years. Reberry received her doctorate in education in 2002 in ed leadership with emphasis in instructional technology. In her dissertation, she looked at how professional development activities affect teachers and the use of technology in their classroom. We also have Nikki Walker, who is the Blended Learning Program Manager for the Idaho Digital Learning Academy. She has been involved with traditional and online models of education since 2003 and has a wide array of educational experience and practical knowledge. And finally, we have Dr. Kellerer, who has been the Director of the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning at Northwest Nazarene University since its inception in January 2013. Kellerer is also the Project Manager for a statewide pilot project to use Khan Academy in K-12 public and private institutions to enhance personalized learning environments. Prior to directing the Center for Innovation, Kellerer was the Executive Director of Information Technology at Northwest Nazarene University. Kellerer received his doctorate in education in 2002 in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis on technology and distance education. In his dissertation, he explored pedagogical practices and the use of software in online learning. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand over the webinar to them. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Catherine. It's a privilege to be a part of this wonderful opportunity to speak to all of you from different parts of the country and actually the world. I'm speaking to you from China at the moment, and really excited to be a part of this. We began this research some time ago, and I want to talk a little bit in the beginning here, Catherine, and the rest of you about why we think this is important. It's really exciting work to us. When Northwest Nazarene University got involved, the Idaho Digital Learning Academy came to us and asked us to take a look at what they were doing and see if it was effective and meaningful. You have to understand that in Idaho we didn't start with a good track record. Education Week ranked Idaho number 48 in K-12 education. 60% of our 4th to 8th graders are not proficient in math. 65% of them are not proficient in reading. And 10% of Idaho students end up graduating from college. That's not a track record that we are excited about. And yet we're urgent and we are excited about the opportunities that lay ahead. And so when we began to see the incredible work that IDLA has been doing, we were pleasantly surprised to be able to enter into this research opportunity to find out what teachers, what students were doing and how they were transforming in the state. So I'd like to ask, let me kind of begin, I think, with asking Nikki if you would talk to us a little about your definition of blended learning before we get in too far, so we all are talking about the same terminology.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eric. As we know, there's a lot of definitions of blended learning around the nation, and Idaho is no exception. We have a lot of different definitions floating around, so we try to uniform that across districts, and the definition that we chose to educate districts on is the one from the Clayton Christensen Institute. And the reason we chose this definition of formal education in which students learn at least in part through online delivery of content and instruction with some element of student control over time, pace, place, and at least in part in a supervised location away from home. The reason we chose that is we've seen for the past many years that a lot of classrooms were web enhanced or technology enhanced and not quite getting to that blended instruction. So I think the piece in the definition that we use is giving students more control over time, pace, path, and place. And really nudging teachers to get and feel comfortable doing that so that students are having more control and accountability of their own education, and also again nudging teachers to put their content online, make it accessible from anywhere and any place.
Great, thank you. So Sherawn, when we begin to look at this research, tell us a little bit about how IDLA trains teachers. Who are the people that are part of this study, so that our audience gets an understanding of who we studied and who we researched?
Sure, thanks, Eric. When we first begin and go into a district, we actually work with all different parts of the stakeholders throughout the district. So we work with the administrators on introductory information and strategic planning so that we can be sure that we're covering what they need for content, support, and training. And then we work with them and an administrator, a technology administrator, to get the program set up. When it comes to training, we then work with their teachers. And the first year, we provide 2 to 3 hours of face-to-face sessions. And then when those sessions are over, they then have the choice of online pedagogy course to take, and they all do that. And then in year 2, we either offer the same training as we did for year 1, but for a new round of trainers. And then those that were trained in year 1 have additional choices for online focused learning or additional blended pedagogy.
Okay, very good. And Eric Werth, can you maybe describe the study a little bit as we head into the results? Or actually, maybe I'll take this moment to talk about what areas we investigated, and then you can talk about the actual research. There were 5 major categories that we looked at in regards to the research. First of all, general uses of blended learning. We wanted to get an understanding of each of the different types of major uses. And then we wanted to look at communication. Does blended learning improve communication between teachers, between students, student-teacher communication? And then, of course, academic ability. Did blended learning improve the academic ability of a student? And then student engagement. Wanted to talk about that and listen to that. And then we asked the final question, how does it actually impact the teaching experience? For a teacher, do they feel more enjoyment in their teaching? Those types of things. So Eric, with that, why don't you kind of dive into the research component?
Sure. So like you said, we had created these categories, and the way we came up with the prompts for the students, really wanted the teachers to answer both about the teachers and the students. So we went back to formal papers, blogs, videos, anything that we could find online or in print that described the benefits of blended learning. And we wanted to ask the teachers about those. And we felt like the teachers were a good group to ask that for, even when it came to student items like their engagement and their excitement, because I as a teacher can see the outcome of that excitement and that motivation on the part of the students. So we created a survey, but we recognized that there would be a number of different people receiving this. Some of them will have gone through blended learning and used it in their class, and some wouldn't. So we developed a branching survey. We sent the survey to about 627 people. But one of the first questions we asked is whether or not they had used blended learning for at least a semester. And those that said yes got a particular set of questions based on how that had impacted their teaching and their view of the students' learning. Those that said no, we asked some different questions. If they planned on using blended learning in the future, we asked about some of the barriers they were encountering and when they might plan on using blended learning in the future. If they said no, I don't plan on using blended learning, we asked them some questions about why that was the case. So after getting our responses, we had 147 people respond to the survey. We can see here the majority of them were female, excuse me. We also had most of the people who responded were in that 9 to 12 grade, the high school age, and most of them came from rural districts. So that was kind of the group of teachers that we had responding to the survey. We found a lot of it. We had about 42 or so different prompts. So we had a lot of data that we received from those teachers who had used blended learning, and this slide is going to show you some of the most positive impacts that we found. We found quite a few positive impacts that teachers felt to blended learning. This was just some of the highest. So you can see that down below, the blue is the either better or much better. So we asked them, let us know on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being much better before blended learning, 3 being the same before and after blended learning, all the way up to 5, much better after blended learning, how it has impacted, blended learning has impacted these particular categories. And so here, the highest benefit we saw was to providing one-to-one instruction, using student data, monitoring learning, the ability to be innovative, struggling or providing information to students who are struggling or absent, and then the ability to provide self-paced learning for those students. Those were all some of the highest positive impacts of blended learning, and we see that most of those are up in the 80% or so felt that it was either better or much better after they started using blended learning within their classrooms. On the other hand, the ones that were found to be least positive were these. The ability to provide resources to those with special needs, and then student-student communication, teacher-parent communication, teacher-teacher communication, and student attendance. And you see here that these kind of fell within that 12 to 40% range of being either better or much better following blended learning. That being said, if we would have put the same in with better or much better, all of these would have been up in the 90%. So while teachers didn't necessarily see a benefit to blended learning in these categories within their classrooms, most of it was about the same. So there was only a few, maybe 10% or less, that felt like it was actually worse with blended learning than without it. So we see that for the most part, teachers were very positive about this use of blended learning within their classroom. And just kind of as comparison, there was about 61% of the teachers who felt like the teacher-student communication was better or much better with blended learning. So we saw kind of benefits to both the academics and to some of the communication elements with blended learning.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say, that those results were the scale of those results were somewhat staggering to us. We were excited when we began to read exactly how powerful the impact of the blended learning was going to have on our students. And we noticed some correlations that began to take place during that time as well. As we read through the correlations, we realized that self-paced learning and the teacher's ability to innovate had a tremendous correlation with the overall quality of student work. That, of course, was a great positive indicator for us. And then we realized that the teacher's ability to provide resources to students and the student's ability to locate the resources had a large correlation on the self-direction of a student, the student's perseverance in their task, which we're always looking to see if students can persevere and struggle through a task. And then again, the overall quality of work was greatly impacted. And this gave us some real positive feedback for as we went forward, which as the IDLA began to think about this, I want to know, Sherawn, if you can talk to us a little bit about how you have responded to this survey. Even in the few months that we've had these results, tell us a little about what you have done. Actually, maybe before that, I'm sorry, from where I'm at, I can't see the next slide, but let me jump in even before I turn the mic back over to you, Sherawn. That there were some things that we were looking for in the survey that we had expected. We expected that teachers who had participated in blended learning would give us advice in the survey, or give advice to new participants about how to use blended learning best. And then we also expected those who were not using blended learning to talk to us about different barriers as to why they were not using it. And we expected those to be different. We were a little bit surprised to find out that in the end it came back that the advice that each of them gave to us was actually identical. The three things that all of them agreed on was that we, teachers, need more training. Professional development is incredibly important to the process of blended learning, and those that were not doing blended learning were saying we just need a little more training. And then the second area that was significant for both parties was technology. If you don't have your technology in place, or if it's not adequate to actually do blended learning well, then that became a barrier for people. And then the third area that they both agreed on was time. It takes time to prepare to do blended learning properly. It takes time to convert yourself over to a blended learning environment in your classrooms. And then the fourth area actually was not in agreement between both sides. People that were not currently using blended learning did not mention this, but those who had been using blended learning said there needs to be a stick-with-itness, a tenacity, because it doesn't come natural at first. And it's not always easy at first, but if teachers are encouraged, if teachers are helped and there's collaboration involved and they stick with it, blended learning pays off in the end. So now I'll come back to Sherawn and say, Sherawn, could you talk to us a little about how the IDLA responded to the survey data that you received?
Sure, thank you. So after reviewing the survey data and analyzing and thinking about it, one of the first things we decided to do was to change how we train teachers. So Eric, if you could go to the next slide. What we do now, when we started this fall, we went from doing the 3 hours of training just for half days to now we've extended it to an all-day training 3 times for those teachers. So they come together for 3 hours in the morning and we do all of the technology training. So the LMS training, how to import, input, export, etc., the gradebook. And then in the afternoon, the teachers have time to build and create their courses and make their plan for how to move forward while we are still there with them helping as they do the hands-on piece. And that has proven very successful so far. And then additionally, we are beginning to work with teachers in their content area versus having all the teachers come together. For instance, we might just have all the math teachers come together or the English teachers and then do another content area on a different day. And that has begun to prove successful as well.
Great, thank you. Eric Werth, will you talk to us a little about the implications in general, not just what IDLA has done, not just what Idaho has done now to try to move forward, but how can our audience gather information from this data?
Yes, and as you mentioned before, we had kind of expected from different groups of individuals to have different ideas, different barriers, different best practices, and what we found is a lot of them were saying very similar types of things. So we were able to take a look at those and condense them into a couple of main implications we have for educators. The first is that implementing blended learning takes time. And we hear this over and over again from the teachers who were involved and the ones who had just begun, that they had a significant amount of time that they had to put in to look at their classes differently, to learn the new systems, to understand how to use those within class, to revisit how they are teaching their class in light of using blended learning. So whereas an experienced teacher who has taught for some period of time has the experience and the lesson plans already built up from previous years, now they have to go back and relook at those again and put in a lot more time getting ready for that. So that was a big piece, is that you need to expect that when you start this implementation process that there is going to be a time investment up front and throughout that year to make that as effective as possible, both from a learning curve standpoint of the teacher as well as just developing new materials. As you mentioned, people kept on saying too that there's going to be initial struggles. They might be technology related, they may be kind of personal related with trying to determine how I change my lessons and how can I make use of this, or how are these students being impacted by this. You see a lot of people who kind of changed how they were doing things over time as they reflected back on that experience, but that they have those initial struggles, that time, the things maybe not working the way they expect them to have to plan around that. So they had to persevere through those initial struggles, but everybody that had used it and mentioned that said that what they benefited and the benefit they got from it at the end was more than worth both the time and those initial struggles to get through it. One suggestion that teachers that had been using blended learning had for people to help kind of mitigate that time element was to build lessons and to build those materials as you go. So I said that you don't want to go in thinking that you have to have everything done for the entire unit or the entire semester ahead of time, but you can go along, you can build that material as you go through, so it's not quite so overwhelming to try to do all at once. Another piece was to seek formal and informal training both before and after the implementation process. So they said, go out, find those classes that are offered on how to use blended learning or the different technologies. Take the time to go through those and have that training so you know up front kind of what it is that you are going to be using and how that might work in. But also seek the informal training. The teachers around you or the people that the people that are other teachers, maybe even in other districts who are using some of these technologies. Finding out from them in teacher meetings or conferences or just going over and visiting can be valuable in not making sure that you are not kind of recreating the wheel, that you aren't going through some barriers that otherwise you might be able to avoid if you have that. And both doing that before and after the implementation process. So certainly there's some things that you need to do before you begin, but also during that process of implementation, you should seek out that formal and informal training because it can really benefit somebody having been through a portion of that implementation to go back to those training courses and that formal or informal training and use that to benefit their continuing process of implementation.
And Eric, this is Nikki.
We also saw.
Oh, can I add in here? We talked about on the slide before that you mentioned a couple of things, Eric, which I wanted to hit on is for IDLA, those are some of the things that we implemented as well as far as creating fishbowl classrooms and offering them time to develop. We even had some districts where they would have, they scheduled prep times together so those blended teachers could work, and we found a lot of success in that, and those are some things that we're going to be rolling out this year as well as those takeaways, exactly what you mentioned, and now they're putting those to practice, and it's improving the tenacity, which Eric Kellerer talked about, as well as continuing to develop.
Excellent, thank you. We also found some implications for students. And like I said, we were talking to teachers about their view of how this was impacting the students. But what the teachers were telling us in this process was that through blended learning, students were better able to learn how to take responsibility for their own learning. So rather than necessarily just depending on the teacher to provide the material and the direction, they were learning that self-directedness, how to approach learning in a way that they hadn't before. So that was something that I think we all want from our students, and we expect to think after they graduate in either higher education or in the workforce that they can do that. This was a piece that the teachers felt was helping them get towards that goal. The interest level of students during instruction. The teachers that were using it were pretty overwhelmingly positive about the fact that the students were more interested in instruction when blended learning was used. So that was something that, again, as a teacher, if you have somebody who is interested in the instruction, they're going to learn more, they're also going to be more motivated, behavioral issues are likely to go down. There's a lot of positives to having those students engaged and very much interested in the instruction. And if that can be increased through the use of blended learning, then that's a great positive of that method. Other things we saw about students, student perseverance. Teachers a lot of times said student perseverance was much better. Certainly, you know, every student's probably going to reach a point at some point in their career where something's not easy or they're running into barriers of their own. If they can learn that skill of perseverance, it will help them not only in a particular class, but also in other elements of their life. And overall quality of student work. Teachers thought the overall quality of what the students were able to do within the classroom was better after they used blended learning. So through the tools and through the characteristics that methodology was helping them build, they felt like what the students were able to do at the end was of higher quality and better met their expectations than in years where they hadn't used blended learning.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. I'm going to open it up for questions, and you can chat your questions to us. Or I don't know if you can talk, if the audience can all talk, but I think the participants and the audience can all chat with us and ask questions about this. And while they're doing that, I'm just gonna ask a question of Nikki, because I'd like, now that we have a little bit of time, I'd kind of like you to respond to a question that I think would be on everyone's mind today, Nikki, and that is, as the blended learning manager in Idaho, you may have an administrator coming to you and say, you know, this blended learning costs money. It's going to cost time. I'm going to have to give my teacher some time, and it's going to cost me in, you know, the infrastructure and the technology I have to build out in my classroom. So why should I do this? Why should I invest in this way? What would you, Nikki, say to an Idaho administrator trying to make those important decisions right now?
You know, there's a couple different answers to that, Eric, and it's a great question and one we get all the time. There's lots of benefits, as we know, to blended learning. What we're finding, especially with research and surveys that we're seeing come out, is it not only provides better engagement for students, it's not only providing quicker feedback, it's not only providing individualized learning, but it's also helping those teachers. Those teachers are engaged, they're excited about teaching, they're finding new ways to reach students, and really and truly being able to differentiate for every single student. And there's technology available to do that. I was a classroom teacher for 7 years, and it's hard to differentiate for every student, and just having the ability to do that and do it well, along with all of those other great things that are out there, that's really where, when I talk to an administrator, that's where they want to go. How can we provide equal education for every student? And this is a path to do that. As far as it costs money, it does cost money, and we don't have a lot of money here in Idaho. So we have to be creative. So thinking, how what kind of content are we going to get? Are our teachers going to create that? Are we going to purchase that? Can we pull from our curriculum budget because we might be moving away from textbooks? Can we pull from our professional development budget because they're going to be getting professional development? So what we do is we just really sit down and think through that process of what it's going to cost and what are their options that they have. And truly almost every district is different, as you can imagine, in strategically planning to provide the needs for each one of those.
Great, thank you. And so while we're on that topic, Nikki, I don't see any questions popping up from the audience. While we're on that topic, is blended learning a threat to teachers, or do they need to feel like their jobs are on the line if they participate in blended learning?
Absolutely not. I know that's been a fear for a long time for some teachers, and I think as we as a nation become more educated on what blended learning is, technology works in partnership with a teacher, and nothing could ever replace that face-to-face teacher in that interaction. But using technology as a tool to continue to improve the education for all students and to help teachers teach in a way that they can provide the most one-on-one instruction for every student is really the goal. And blended learning is a way to do that. So technology is not a threat when used correctly and as a tool to enhance and engage and provide education for all students.
Thank you, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Sherawn or Eric Werth, would you like to add anything to this as we're waiting for? Okay, I see a hand.
Eric, there's a couple questions. So one of the questions, Tracy asked, did you look at student test scores to determine an increase in academic learning? So that might be a good question in general to see if there was any measure of academics that you used as part of your study. And then the second question was about how they can navigate their funding to structure in this reality. So those are two questions for you guys to think about.
Okay, I'm going to have Eric Werth. I'd like for you to address the academic survey question, and then Sherawn, if you'll answer the funding issue, that'd be great.
Sure, I think it's a good question about looking at academic test scores. At this point, we hadn't. What we did ask is we had a section of the survey where particular academic categories, we asked how they felt students' academic achievement was in those particular academic subjects, either much worse before blended learning all the way to much better after blended learning. So we asked about math, reading comprehension, scores on homework and tests, students' ability to take responsibility for their own learning, student perseverance, student ability to locate their own resources, and then the development of higher level thinking skills within those. So we did touch on some of those and asked the teachers to let us know their view of how the scores on homework and tests were impacted by blended learning. And just looking at that, about 54% of those who responded said that they felt that those scores on homeworks and tests were better or much better after blended learning. So we did that, but we have not asked the teachers to go back and look at their individual test scores or their grade books to find out percentage-wise how that changed.
And I'll add to that if I can. It wasn't part of this survey, but we did have some districts that did some data on their own and doing pre-tests and comparing end-of-course assessments and also the state tests that we give. And in one district, their science scores went up 20 points from when they started their blended learning to, I think it was 2 years after. So we are starting to get that type of data in. We're working with districts. The past 3 years have been a development and building stage, so now I think we're at the point where we could go in and get those scores from students.
Okay.
Right, Sherawn, do you want to talk to us a little about the funding aspect of blended learning?
Sure. So when we go in and do strategic planning with the districts, that's one of the first things we do when they sign on to become a member of our consortium. And they take a look at existing money, where they're spending it, if there is a way to spend differently, use different pots of money in different ways. Unfortunately, there's not like the right answer on how to where to get the funding, etc. I believe there's districts that have written grants as well to use it. And so sometimes, Mickey, you may have a little additional input here on the funding piece, but for the most part, I think we help them take a look at how they can move funding from one place to a different place, depending on what it has been spent on in the past.
Right, and our state also has offered some grants, sorry Eric, that they use as well, some professional development grants and technology grants and things like that.
Yeah, and I wanted to add one piece to that question, and that is we're doing another research pilot study in the state right now, and one administrator said to me is, if the data tells me that this helps student learning, we'll figure out a way to find the money. And I think one of the things that we're seeing with this research study here on the blended learning is that the data is telling us that it really does impact student learning and student engagement in a new way. And now it's all of our jobs, I think, to think creatively about how to use the very limited resources that are out there to improve and use blended learning. Are there any other questions?
Eric,
this is Eric, okay. And I have a follow-up to that. That I think that when you talk about funding and grants, that it can be there's an implication there to how that's done and how the money is spent too. In that technology and the access to technology was one barrier that was identified, but time and training was another. And I think sometimes it can be easy to look at the technology being the barrier and purchase technology and try to put that into the hands of teachers and expect that to have the outcomes that's desired. But within that process and within that planning process of getting the technology, there also has to be that training and the time piece built in so that that implementation process can be smooth.
Very good. And I also thought, Eric, there's a question about I believe in summary, the model of blended that they use. So each district used a variety of blended model of the blended models, from anywhere from flex to flipped classroom, station, lab, individual rotation, things like that. I would say the majority of the teachers for this particular study used the classroom rotation or the station rotation model, where the teacher was in the classroom with the students for the school period, but they would also rotate them within the classroom to go to their online portions and also assign online portions outside of the classroom. Now, of course, we live in a very rural state and not all students have access outside of class, so they have to be careful with that. And most don't require work online outside of class, but it was nice to have those resources. We encourage them to have their resources available for students that can access anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Students don't have to have, all students don't have to have connections in their home, and the teachers don't have to have a one-to-one ratio in the classroom. Are there any other questions? AJ has their hand up. I don't know how to give access to AJ.
Well, if you don't mind me grabbing the mic real quick, I guess this is another big picture question, but I feel like you folks have great insight into this and how folks are thinking. One thing I always kind of laugh about is how we take some of the traditional school models and put them online and act like that solves the problem, where we kind of take some of the problems from the traditional classroom and put them online and keep them. For example, semester start and end dates and things like that. When you talk about blended learning, certainly when you're a district and you're running a program, you have to have some level of parameters, right? You can't just have it be quote-unquote the Wild West. But you described all these different ways to do it, so to speak. Any sense or any concern that when you put those parameters on a program, which I totally understand that you need to do, that there will be a group of individual students who are restricted and who can't really truly benefit to the max from these tools and strategies?
Now let me start answering that question. I think we might have a couple responses to that, but you're absolutely right. This is not just about putting technology in a classroom, but it's a shift, a systemic shift that we have to begin thinking about. How do we move towards competency-based learning? How do we help students individualize their learning processes and accelerate them at different paces? That is a very important point, and I think in other areas that we're working on in research, we're trying to improve that. But it has to be addressed. It has to be addressed from the administration perspective, from policy perspective. So we're in communication with legislators. But that's a very, very good point that you make in that question.
And
others want to respond to that?
Yeah, this is Nikki. I'll add to that. What I'm seeing around our state is blended learning is becoming, it is a change agent, as you know. I'm finding that a lot of districts start within their comfort level, which is exactly what you're saying, within that semester parameter, with that seat time parameter. However, as I've seen them progress over the years, they are becoming more flexible. They're tinkering, if you will, with different options, different models of blended at, of course, the teacher's comfort discretion, the student's comfort discretion. I had a district last year try and roll out a full blended program. Some students weren't quite ready for that. They pulled back. They're working through those things. So I think it is a work in progress. I think they see the potential. I think that the flexibility and individualized learning is a huge reward at the end, but they also realize that there's students and teachers and parents that need to move along that path with them, and most are very conscious about that and taking baby steps, I guess, to get there. So I think each district has their own vision and what those parameters are. Some push the envelope more than others, but for the most part, they've all started small and want to grow from there to see where it goes and what they can do with it.
Nikki mentioned that some students aren't ready. We saw something in a classroom this past spring where we were experimenting with some blended learning, and the students were making 1 year's worth of progress in math education in just 3 months. And it was great academically, and yet we had a couple of students that we surveyed in that process that said, can I just go back to having my teacher tell me the information and have me do a worksheet? That was really simple back then, but this idea of really struggling and working hard and accelerating was a new challenge that this student hadn't experienced. They'd been an A student all of their lives, and now all of a sudden they were having to work at it. But they were accelerating like crazy. So we saw it as a real positive. They were trying to learn a new paradigm of learning. Are there other questions? Well, I thank you all for participating.
Eric, there were a couple other questions earlier. One was about career tech and blended learning classrooms, and then are you integrating in competency education as part of the blended learning classrooms?
Nikki, do you want to respond to that?
We're getting there. Again, we definitely know the benefits of that, and we try to, I'll go back to the career education and professional technical and things like that. We definitely certainly try to educate teachers on the benefits of that and districts of the benefits of that. I go back to, comfort level and being that change agent and having it be grassroots and teacher-driven is it's really starting what those teachers are comfortable with, them developing those courses that are that they need, and then as we move along, we encourage them to think about career readiness and those technology pieces and bringing those into their classroom as well. And then competency-based, there's only so much time we have with them, and trying to get them to do all those type of things are great. Sherawn mentioned we provide a lot of online pedagogy content that they could certainly take courses to help bring that stuff into their classroom. So I guess the short of it is, yes, there's teachers that are doing that, but it really depends on their needs. So if it's something that they need to do or they want to do, they're doing it. It's not something that's being asked of them to do unless it's necessary for that district or classroom.
A question asked earlier was if you're willing to share your survey instrument, and then I would kind of tag on the end of that. Now that you've completed this research, how would you change it as you move forward if you do the research again? Or another way of asking that is, so for blended learning schools or programs that are just starting up, what would you recommend to them that they should be looking at from the very beginning as they move forward, in addition to those academic test scores that we've talked about in the past? So first question is, are you willing to share the instrument? And if so, how could people get access to that? And then two, what recommendations do you have for people starting up programs, and what kinds of questions should they be asking and surveying as they move forward?
Yes, I think first of all, yes, we would be glad to share our survey instrument with you. I'll try to put that email address here on the screen here in a moment. We're very open at what we do here in our research center. The second thing I should mention is that this report actually is not, well, this report's complete. We are already moving on with some interviews of teachers trying to go a little deeper. Some of the questions that came out of the research, now we want to dig deeper into the very teachers that were surveyed and interview them about what their thoughts and what their feelings have been throughout this process of learning, so that we can get a little more detail on there. Eric Werth, will you talk a little about some future questions and maybe how people can ask their own questions within their districts and their regions? And I'll put the email address on the screen.
Yes, and I think it's a great question. And like Eric said, we kind of saw this as being the beginning of a research strand that we hope to continue. We thought we might know some of the things we'd find, but really we didn't know what to expect about the impact. So like I said, we went back and tried to put together quite a bit of information about different ways other people had said that blended learning might have been impacted, and put all those prompts in there to try to get an overall kind of a mile-high picture of what is happening and what impact teachers see to blended learning. Like Eric said, we are going to go back and in the process of looking at interviews with teachers to find out what they can tell us more in depth about how it is that this is impacting them and what they're facing, and what suggestions they would have for people going forward in the same place. I think that a couple times we've had people bring up in the chat window about interviewing students or surveying students, and we are doing some surveys for students in some different ways, and we have talked about the best way of reaching students within these classrooms to find out how it is that they view blended learning is impacting them. We know from visiting schools around us for other projects that the students are very open, they're very tech savvy for a large part, and when blended learning comes along and those opportunities, that they really appreciate being able to take things that they're doing and using in their life outside of school and see the educational implications and the educational applications of those. Because certainly, the internet is great for a lot of things, But it's a huge benefit for people who are doing research and trying to gather academic material and educational material too, if people know how to use it. So I think that we are looking at going back and talking to students more and finding out what information they can provide us into how they view blended learning in the different formats that it comes in, impacts them and how it changes their mindset about themselves, about their abilities, about their excitement for school. And I think that through that, and looking both at the teachers and the students, that we can get a good picture of how blended learning really can impact the whole educational environment to create kind of a situation where students are learning and they're excited, and not just within the classroom, but also outside of the classroom and using those skills in the ways that we hope they do throughout their educational career.
Thank you.
And this is Nikki. I can take that second question.
Are there any other?
I was going to just go and take that second question, Eric, if you don't mind. That it was how to get started and questions to ask, and just one great resource that I've used for many years and have developed documents from was the Planning for Quality from the Evergreen Education Group, who writes Keeping Pace, and they have a packet out, I guess, if you will, on the different modes of online and blended learning as far as content, teaching, technology, and operations, and the type of questions to ask. So when it comes to building your program, it's really asking those questions, understanding what your vision is. My biggest takeaway from the last 3 years is honestly giving teachers time to develop. That if you go with the route of teachers building their content, which is the most cost-effective way to build a program, it's going to take time, and when I say time, it could mean years. So not putting constraints on teachers and only giving them a few months to develop courses or get things ready, and just making sure that they have that support and that infrastructure in place to really foster what they want to do and what you want them to do.
Yeah, when we look at the questions to answer, let me say, as I've worked with lots of teachers now, the question that you don't ask is you don't start with the device and say, oh, now I have this device, I have this iPad, I have this computer in my classroom, now what do I do with it? That's really not the place to begin. The place to begin is, what is it that I want our students to learn, and then what are the resources that I can use to help them in that learning process? That's kind of the basis for the beginning of your asking the questions, is the student learning portion. Well, are there other questions that we can answer in the next minute? Okay, with that, I want to say thank you so much to all of you who have participated, all of you who have been wonderful audience, and I thank you so much for this opportunity. I do welcome those of you who would like to send us questions to that doceo@nnu.edu, and thank you very much. Have a great day.